Welcome to the Tanz im August podcast. This podcast series is part of the Tanz im August Festival, presented by HAU Hebbel am Ufer. This year, it takes place from 15th to the 31st of August in 9 locations in Berlin. Several artists from this year's program have been invited to participate in a conversation. Each episode seeks to offer insights into their creative process, uncovering what's behind the decisions they made and the knowledge they gained along the way. The artists tell listeners about their current and past projects, revealing detailed information about the work that will be presented during Tanz im August. In this episode, Alina Lauer, dramaturg and producer of the festival, talks with Marco D Agostin. He will present his work Best Regards on 29th, 30th and 31st of August at HAU.
So, welcome Marco to our podcast recording today. How are you feeling?
Thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. I'm happy to talk with you.
Likewise. Thanks a lot for sharing this space with me. And I would like to ask you to maybe introduce you, first of all, to our listeners who don't know you yet.
So my name is Marco D Agostin. I'm, would say, dance maker / performer, but interested in many aspects of the big field of live arts, based in Italy, based in Bologna, even if I actually never work in Bologna. So I like to say that in Bologna is the place where my books are and where I do my washing machines. But it's not so much the town where I manage to work, but my house is there and I work in Italy and also a lot abroad.
Nice. And you have the chance now to present your work at Tanz im August at the Festival 24. Best Regards is a homage to a much-known choreographer, Nigel Charnock, right? So you play with the medium of the letter. Can you maybe describe a bit more, elaborate a bit more what the medium of the letter brings in for you and how it translates also as a paradigm to the stage?
Yes. So my interest for letters is not so much related to nostalgia, which could be also another conversation that we could have around letters. During the pandemic, for example, many philosophers, Preciado among all, were coming back to the use of letters somehow because there was a nostalgia or because there was a desire to find other ways of communicating rather than the virtual one, let's say, that rather than the online one. And somehow letters have this common knowledge that they bring us back to a different sense of timing and a different depth in our thoughts, because handwriting requires a different timing of thinking, etc. But actually, there's not so much this nostalgic feeling in my interest for letters. What is really interesting for me about them is that they are devices of time. So in this sense, they are really close to performative devices. And I will explain you why in simple words. Usually in a letter, there are always 3 different temporalities that are condensed. So present, past, and future are always intertwined. And also there are 3 different phases that distinguish the life of a letter. The first one is the moment in which someone writes it. And of course, this person is always projected into a kind of future, the future in which someone will eventually read the letter. So the exercise of writing the letter is always an exercise in which the body leans towards the future. So the body that writes a letter can never surrender to gravity, to the physical gravity and also to the gravity of thoughts, because thoughts, they need to be thrown somewhere. And this place, this spot in time and space towards which thoughts are thrown, it's of course a bet. It's never clear. It's not a geographical place, even if then you eventually put the address on the envelope. And the reason why this spot in time and space is somehow a place for prediction and a place for projection is because there is the second phase of the life of a letter, which is the journey of the letter. And this journey, by definition, is dangerous because letters can arrive late, meaning that they can contradict your projections. For example, I write a letter imagining that the person will receive it in a certain condition of weather, of feelings, of a state of mind, but then the delay of the letter can totally contradict this condition. So my message can arrive and find the person in a completely different state. Letters can get lost. This means that the words you put out in the world, they can die forever. So of course, this opens another topic, which I will not talk about now, but just to mention it, which is the topic of the devices on which we save our words and in general our material. So a topic that deals with how fragile the devices are, but also how interesting it can be to deliver something to a device that is so unsecure and so fragile. So, and letters can also arrive in time, but they can not find the addressee, the person that we wrote to. Anything could happen to the person that we wrote to in the time frame that the journey took. So then the third phase is the moment in which someone reads or doesn't read the letter. And this is, of course, a bit the time of the person that reads the letter unravels back all the phases of the letter. So it's a projection actually towards the past, but totally in the present time. So because all of this, and I could go on, but I try to stop now, because all of this, for me, letters, they are so close to performance. Because the performance, it's not only about the present time, and this is something that I really like, and I really like to study because, of course, for many, many decades, we were, let's say, trained as spectators, as artists, as citizens, always thinking that the performance is the art of the present time, of the here and now. But actually, I don't agree anymore with this. I think in a performance, there are so many other time layers that need to be taken care of. It's always, for me, a performance, the meeting of two pasts, the past of the performer and the past of the spectator, that are always having a dialogue. And also the performance deals a lot with the future, because everything that as a performer, as a person on stage, you throw towards the audience, every letter that you write through your dance towards the audience and for the audience, will have a destiny after the end of the show that we all need to take care of as an audience and as an artist. So this is why for me, letters, they were like a lens that could help me to see things that are so substantial in a performance, but I could look at them through a lens that made them bigger or smaller, but somehow that changed my perspective.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I think it's really interesting to take all these time layers into consideration, also in the live arts, as they are called. This also brought me in my thinking, like when I thought about your performance, to the word choreography itself, right? Because it comes from Latinic Greek, the Latinic Greek for to write dance. So it already also has this writing aspect in it.
Mm-hmm.
So would you consider like the show you do, the dance you do that is choreographed, like something that you wrote before for the audience?
Well, it's an interesting question, especially because I like a lot the notion of writing. And I have the feeling that every time I do a new piece, especially during the last few years, I always try to somehow study or refer to existing literature genre formats, a way of writing as possible sources of inspiration for a dance and for a choreography especially. This depends on a very personal aspect, which is that I'm a reader much more than I am a dancer and a spectator by nature. So I'm a big fan of literature, but especially I'm a big fan of how different formats, devices, and genre in literature can deliver different contents. So what I try to do is to try to understand how these two writings, the writing of a book and the writing of a choreography, they can translate skills, tools, and transmit these tools and these skills for each other, let's say. In the specific kind of, so I absolutely think there is a strong connection between these two writings. Of course, what choreography gives us as an opportunity is that I think choreography is always, I'm saying something very simple, maybe banal, but I'm trying to think out loud with you today. Choreography, it's always two different writings that happen at the same time, which is the pre-existing writing, so the score that can be as free as you want, of course, the score that has been decided up to the moment in which the performer meets the audience, and then the actual writing of the dancer, the performer, with the audience. It doesn't matter how much the score is open, how much the audience is involved, like all of these aspects, for me, they all deal with the score that has been decided before, so with a set of rules, because of course choreographic writings always comes with a certain protocol. But it's really, I'm talking about a different kind of writing, and it's really the writing that it's at the very core of the job of a dancer and a performer. So this idea that somehow you have to synchronize the pulse of your thoughts and maybe also the pulse of your heart with the thoughts and the heart of the spectators, because the idea for me is always that spectators and performers have to write together, and they are actually writing together, even if they are not conscious about it. They are writing together, no? So the dancer is writing the choreography that has been set, let's say, and the spectator is always writing the experience that is going to have, and is writing it in its memory. So these two writings, they go together, but of course the performance always has a certain degree of power that it can manage and deal with, and this is where he's writing in real time. No, he's somehow manipulating in a gentle, soft, sweet way, but they're always manipulating the experience of the spectator, and this is the writing of the performer, of the dancer. Yes.
So in that way, what you described before with the, let's say, real letters, this anticipation of what is going to happen with the letter, in what condition it's going to find the reader, this is a bit maybe the soft kind of manipulation that is a bit in the position of power, that you are starting the process. You're the one initiating it, and thereby you already have a bit more control than the other parts and entities that are involved in the process of fulfilling the letter, let's say.
Yes, exactly. I'm really obsessed with this idea of power now, with the idea that people on stage, they always have this degree of power that we desperately try to share with the audience, but it's so difficult. And I think that, of course, like the event itself of a dance piece needs this silent and invisible contract that somehow every audience signs, which is, okay, I give you the possibility to manipulate my time and my thoughts, but then, of course, I also need my space inside, no, in order to not feel trapped, in order to feel somehow that this is an exercise of freedom and democracy somehow. And because also letters, somehow they are not democratic, because when you receive a letter, you're not having a conversation with this person. So actually you receive a waterfall of information that they can also be very painful, that somehow you cannot, you just receive them if you decide to read, right? So there's also a parallelism in this.
It's a, let's say, listening exercise, because you're really confronting yourself with that monologue from another person.
Exactly.
So maybe this is a bit something that is a bit different from like that. I think one could go more into this, where the layers overlap than in performance and letter writing. But what I was wondering now about, if I may ask that question, because your performance, Best Regards, is more or less a letter itself to Nigel Charnock, a well-known choreographer who unfortunately is not longer with us. And actually, just as side information here, he has also been part of Tanz im August 5 times in the history. So I think the first time he was there with a workshop presentation and a performance in 1995, and came back in 1997 and also in 2003 and 2006 with his well-known choreography Frank. So how can we now think about your performance that is a letter to him that is also then read or fulfilled and shared with the audience? So the recipient is not longer really there, but there is new recipients of the letter. How do you think about that?
I think that yes, I think that the idea of writing to Nigel, it's just for me the occasion to build just at the beginning of the show a tie with the audience. Somehow, since at the beginning of the performance, I share this very little thing, but somehow really connected to something that we all experience in life, which is loss. And I try to share it with the audience in the lighter way possible, let's say. So the tie between me and Nigel and the fact that I am putting myself in front of this loss, in front of this empty space, it's for me actually just a way to tell the audience, hey guys, do you want to go together in this land? But in this land, I will not talk about my relationship with him. I will talk about the relationship that we all have with empty spaces and loss. So at the end, I also have the feeling that even if Nigel is so present somehow in the dramaturgy, because there are so many words, not by Nigel, but dedicated to Nigel, there are so many references, etc. But I have the feeling that through the 60 minutes of the performance, the actual figure of Nigel disappears in the background, in the fog, and other figures appear. And all these other figures that appear, I think they are the figures that all of us, me and the spectators, we somehow summon in the space, that we somehow evoke in the space, and they are our ghosts, I would say. So I actually think that after 5 minutes since the beginning of the show, Nigel is not there anymore. Of course, he's there, but he's really someone that the audience can replace with whoever they want. Of course, because the show it's a letter, I needed a you. No, every letter begins with a dear you. And I needed this you to be replaceable, of course. And I chose not an easy one, because Nigel was totally irreplaceable. No, he was such an extraordinary performer that to put my body and my dance close to him was, and it's still a challenge. But at the end, of course, it's not a confrontation. It's exactly the opposite. No, it's this idea that you try to dance in the shadow of someone and you try to bring light in this shadow.
When you speak about your tie to Nigel Charnock, can you maybe describe a bit more, like in which form your relationship worked? Like how you learned from him also?
In a very simple way, I met him when in 2010, first time. Well, first of all, I have to say that I started dancing very, very late. I was 21 years old. Before I was doing very different things. So I was struggling a lot with this strong desire to make dance my job. I wanted to dance and I wanted it to be part of my life. But then the struggle, especially because in Italy we have many, many problems in the education system for dance and theater. And there were very strong and there still are many stereotypes related to the figure of a dancer that should begin to train when they are 3 years old, and if not, it's too late and you will never dance in your life. So I was, since I also, and the other thing that I need to say is that I come from a very, very small village. So until I was 19 years old, when I moved to Bologna to study at the university, my perception of the world of theater of dance was very, very limited. Dance for me was a dance that I would look at the television, because the village I come from doesn't have theaters, doesn't have cinema. So, and I grew up in an era that was, internet was coming, but YouTube was not so accessible, no? So I was one of the last human beings that couldn't access YouTube in a free way. Also because in my village, the internet connection was very slow. I like to say this because it tells a lot about what is a periphery, no? So if you really grew up in a periphery, then things come slower. And I think this has been my fortune at the end. But of course, when I was 22, 23 years old and I met Nigel, I was very frustrated because I thought that I had lost a lot of time and that I could have never become a real dancer because my technique was not good, etc., etc. And also I had many doubts and questions about what was possible to do on stage. Like, I didn't know if contemporary dance was meant to be just movement, or so very, very basic and naive questions that of course now they made me smile smile for how naive they are. But I want to respect that young man that was just entering the world. And Nigel Charnock, simply by entering the room of the first workshop I took in 2010, he would answer 90% of these questions. Because Nigel was someone that would really, I'm really sorry to bring in the notion of energy, which I am very afraid of talking about energy, even if I think energy is always there, but somehow it's a topic that is so full of cliche that but actually this is what would happen. The energy of Nigel when he would enter a room and lead a workshop or perform a show was somehow like a tsunami that was basically communicating that all the questions you had in your mind about what is possible or not to do on a stage are totally unuseful. What he really worked on with all of us was this idea to always be connected with a principle of pleasure. So this idea that every dance needs to be, for the performer, first of all, connected to a sense of pleasure. And the pleasure was bringing in fun, and the fun was bringing in entertainment. But entertainment that was so present as a topic in Nigel's work was always coming at the end. So the first thing is always the personal pleasure, and then, of course, how to share this pleasure with the audience. So how to make a dance piece a pleasurable experience for all of us, even if Nigel's pieces were most of the time talking about pain, death, void, nonsense of life, etc. But they were always pleasurable experiences. So actually, I think that from Nigel, I really let myself being, how can I say, hit by this energy, by his energy, and this idea that on stage, basically what you have to do is to try to create the conditions in order to be able to explode. And what was really, and so it basically gave me a lot of freedom, no? A lot of freedom. And it made me think a lot about what is the relationship that I build with an audience member made of and based on. And at the end, it's really, really, really a matter of energy and how you are able or not to perceive something of the energy that is coming from the seats and to transform it into something else and to give it back, in a very, very generous feedback loop. The last thing that I want to say about this topic is that when I actually 8 years later began the process of for this piece, for Best Regards, I read a book. There's only one book about Nigel in Italy, which is actually an interview that he gave to a journalist. And there is a moment in which he talks about how he would like to die. And he says, probably I will die on stage exploding into a million particles, shining and brilliant and lightful particles. So actually, this desire of death, let's say, was really connected to all his life and all his work.
Mm-hmm. But in a very poetic way.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And he would have never imagined at that moment that death was so close to him. But somehow also death was for him the possibility to imagine a scene and the possibility to imagine something that would happen for someone else, but in a playful, lightful way. Mm-hmm. He was really pessimistic. I was not optimistic at all. He had really a black existential posture, let's say. But in his pieces, everything would explode like a bomb of energy.
And also interesting that even if we talk about temporality again, imagining one's own death to be an explosion on stage, and then to have an afterlife being a spectacle of particles for an audience is already also transgressing the time that the life normally gives, like the time frame of being a living being.
Yeah.
Which is also very interesting because you're kind of projecting yourself into a space where you cannot longer be, but you still are there somehow.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the stage performance being a kind of explosion, I thought of an interview that you once gave where you also talk about the excessiveness, the overflow, all of these like one package of mode or how to be on stage. And is it countering like the notion of being sober, of sobriety, of being less that we are used to in society?
Yes, I would say, of course, this is a very, very, very personal point of view. It's not even an opinion, it's a point of view. So in my case, because I have the privilege to be on stage. So the privilege to create myself the environments and to be watched. I then, whenever I'm out of the stage, there's a certain feeling of shame somehow. So the shame that you don't allow yourself on stage because you need the stage to be the environment where everything is possible, everything respectful, of course, it's possible. This feeling then has a counter effect, which is that when you go out of the stage, you want to put on a dress of sobriety, let's say. But this is a very, very personal thing, and actually, for example, I think that it's necessary that outside space, the public space should be even more full of exaggerations, colorful and lightful and respectful and full of love, but exaggerations in this sense, which already are in many political protests and manifestations. Yesterday, I was once again listening to an interview of an Italian transsexual politician that actually she's based in Bologna, and she's in her 70s now, so she actually witnessed many eras of the Italian political life, etc. And she was talking about the fact that the political fight of the transsexual community, she's talking about the transsexual community, but she's also talking about in a broader sense, should always be connected to a sense of fun. Exactly because people who are against this community, they try to bring obscure and dark and heavy energies and words. So we always have to somehow to exaggerate, to try to have fun so much that we also explode. So when I was talking about this in the interview that you're mentioning, of course, I'm not talking about those political spaces that needs to be safe and exaggerated. I was talking really about what happens to me when I go out of that environment that I try to build on stage,
Okay, thanks. Sorry that maybe the question was too personal. I hope it was not.
No, absolutely. No.
Good. Let us maybe dive into Best Regards a bit more. So you had a nice idea what to do in the performance, and that was also receiving a letter yourself. Interestingly enough, this letter is written by Chiara Bersani, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who also performed at Tanz am August 4 years ago with her own show, Sottobosco. Yeah. Does she always write the letter especially for the shows, or is it one letter that you always use?
No, it's nobody believes this, but it's actually a new letter for every show. And we have a practice together. So the idea came from the fact that actually Best Regards starts from the letter that Wendy Houston, that was Nigel's best friend and colleague, wrote to him a few days after he died. So the idea was to somehow, and I use a lot the letter of Wendy Houston. She's also a dancer and choreographer. They work together for DVH Physical Theatre. So the letter of Wendy, which is actually a material that is at the core of the piece, but for me was really interesting because it's a letter that will never be read and that arrived too late. And me and Chiara, we work together in the studio talking about this because she always participates in my artistic processes and I do in hers. And we were talking about the fact that me and Chiara, we could be considered like two smaller, younger alter egos of Nigel and Wendy. And we had the possibility to actually do something on time. So to not wait for the other to die in order to say important things. So we said, okay, let's do it every time. So every time that I do the show, we need to dive into this possibility. Then at the end, the letter is written more to the audience than to me. At the beginning, it was written to me, and then now we really found a way to deliver it to the audience because we want the audience to really understand that there is someone that was thinking about them in a past when they were not aware of what the piece was going to be about. You see what I mean? So the practice that me and Chiara have is that I always send her a message about what's going on in the town where the piece is going to be performed. There is somehow 3 or 4 elements that she tries to go through, which are, for example, imagining how the audience is in that moment, connecting her life to the town. So if it's a town or a place where she's been, she tries to bring back memory. Or if it's a place where she's never been, she tries to imagine how it is. She tries to accompany the audience towards the end of the piece, because the end of the piece is there. So there are some elements that she tries to go through, but the letter is always different. And the promise I made is that I never read it before the moment in which it arrives on stage. And it's now possible, just to add this, that after a while we were because now we have an archive of her letters, because they're always different. But because this year, 2 months ago, I published a book that I wrote together with a journalist that goes through some of my pieces. In the book, there is a QR code that actually links to an online archive that collects all the letters of Chiara. Because even if we like the idea that either you're there in the audience or you never listen to the words, but then the archive is so precious that we said, no, let's share it with the audience.
It's an ambitious project. And are the letters handwritten? And does she really send them by post, mail, so to say? Or are they arriving via email? Or I'm very curious to hear also if there is the possibility of the arrival being in danger due to the things you described in the beginning.
I will answer honestly to the first question, which is no, they are not handwritten, which is a thing, because of course, handwriting, as we were saying at the very beginning of this conversation, gives thoughts a different timing and rhythm. And about the second question, I would like to answer and not answer, because I don't want to break the magic of the moment. Let's say it depends. Let's say that I'm not a radical artist. So I would love to be a radical artist. And when we began to do the piece, she was always sending them through post. And basically what I did is that I created a plan B for the scene. If the letter hadn't arrived to the place, what would I have done? And the plan B was to just explain to the audience this. The letter didn't arrive, and somehow it would have made sense. But then again, I tried to be, and this was myself trying to be radical. But then I was like, Marco, this is theater at the end. Let's also face this very basic thing. So there can also things that can be somehow not always related to a principle of truth. So let's say that they always arrive, the letters. They always arrive in this case. Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, there is the playing with the idea that they couldn't. So let's hold up the magic. Let's hold up the magic. Yeah. Nice. So when we dive a bit more into Best Regards, when one looks at it, there is a LED curtain in the back. There is a money machine used on stage. So there's also a machine creating those small little bubbles. How do you connect them? How do you intertwine them with the topics of death, remembrance, and commemoration that are used also for the show?
Well, they are. Let's say that for me, the LED curtain is one object, and then there's the kingdom of all the other objects, and they deal with two different aspects of the dramaturgy, let's say. The LED curtain is actually, for me, how we work with the scenographer and the light designer. The idea was somehow to have something that I could go in and out from, because I wanted to evoke a bit this figure of an entertainer that always has to enter the stage in order to do something extraordinary, So there are parts of the piece in which I really repeat a lot this action of entering and going out, entering, going out, as entertainers do when they enter a stage and they scream, "Welcome, ladies and gentlemen," to the audience. Because somehow this, for me, was a way to think about how entertaining Nigel was in a way that was so distant from how we perceive entertainment in Western society. And I wanted to not destroy, but I wanted really to play with the sadness of the image that we share in Western society of an entertainer somehow. And this is why we built this LED curtain, that somehow it's, even if it's at the end, it's a very cheap version of what you could find in a musical in Broadway, but it's because of the lights and because of the very kitsch work that we did on the writings on top of it, somehow reminds us of a cheesy kitsch world of entertainment that has a melancholic side at least I find. And this melancholic side of the entertainment for me was really related to how Nigel was, and to the idea that precisely because he wanted to die on stage exploding, I imagined a lot during the creation of the piece how I would celebrate the funeral of Nigel. And for sure, the funeral of Nigel would have been a pop rite, no? And pop. And this is also why the piece is so much connected to the song that I wrote for Nigel, which is a pop song that I eventually deliver to the audience at the end of the piece. So the idea is that pop culture is there to also celebrate the death of someone, is precisely because pop culture is so connected to a certain way of living, you know, that somehow puts death in a corner. I'm talking about superficial pop culture. Of course, we can talk about many, many, many layers of pop culture. And nowadays, there are many artists that we could define pop that also bring in the topic of death. But I'm talking in general, no, as we commonly perceive it. And the objects, the reason why I work with so many ugly objects, because all the objects that I bring on stage, they are really ugly. And also, I know that I'm not really good in working with them, but this is precisely why they are there. Because I never worked with objects before, because I wanted to feel again as a teenager or child that is in his bedroom and uses the objects he has to make his own show. So the idea that I started from was how many objects can become a microphone when you play to be an entertainer, to be a singer. So at the beginning, I actually had only objects that would be microphones. Now there are only 4 of them that survived. But then I was really working with the objects that I would find in the space where I was rehearsing. So this is why they are really not connecting through them. Of course, some of them, they have strong relationship with the dramaturgy, except, but in general, there's a certain naivete and a certain randomness that I really like, because it really reminds us of those rooms in which we were performing our own terrible shows when we were very, very young. And somehow this was my way of celebrating Nigel, to call back my adolescent alter ego, no, and to let the adolescent celebrate the death of a teacher, of a master like Nigel.
Well, thank you. That's very personal also. And it also reminded me again of what you told us before, that you grew up in the periphery, and that especially maybe in those spaces where you feel quite far away from everything, you especially have the need to create those spaces, right? Where everything can happen that you are imagining also growing up. And yeah, maybe let's close this podcast with one last question that I have to you. It's it's a very also banal question, but is the experience you had like living in the periphery, and as you said, YouTube came quite late because there was no connection. Is this maybe another metaphor for the paradigm of the letter that arrives probably late, or that there's a gap?
I don't know. What I know is that because I spent many, many years of my life as a young person waiting for speed to come, let's say, and waiting for the center to arrive. So feeling growing up in a slow and peripheral world somehow would always shift a bit in the future the moment in which I would actually try to embrace my dream, just to use a stereotypical sentence. But precisely because of the slowness and the geography and the feeling to be always far away from something that was more important, this gave me the opportunity to test the strength of the desire itself, meaning that I had to keep the desire and my desires in my heart and in my pockets and in my drawers so long before I would eventually try to realize them and make them encounter with reality, that they survived only because they were very strong, despite the slowness, despite the being in a periphery, despite all that we as queer teenagers we face in places like the one where I lived in. That was a very difficult one. So at the end, somehow it's connected to letters because letters are a big form of hope in the power of time. You need to hope that the time that separates you from the moment in which your letter will be read, you need to hope that this time will actually be your friend and that it will help you. So you always have to hope the time it's a power. It's a and in this sense, all the 19 years that I spent in that space were a form of hope that time will eventually work as an ally.
Wow, that's beautifully said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marco, it was a great pleasure to talk to you today. And
Me too.
I'm very much looking forward to welcome you in Berlin in August. There's not so much time left. And yeah, we hope that you will arrive safely. And I also hope that you will now have a good day. And let's talk soon.
Thank you very much for your beautiful questions.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.